you ever thought that the most difficult experiences we go through can actually be a gift? Those of us who've actually gone through these difficult experiences do understand that looking back, it is a gift. So, if identity, value, and worth is the machine in the basement, then trauma is the dark cellar lurking in the corner that no one wants to open. Before I go deeper, please note that I am in no way trying to lighten or undermine the pain of trauma, nor am I trying to reframe horrible experiences into positive ones. I've worked a lot with trauma throughout my career and clients that, while true diagnosable trauma has specific criteria, many of us experience trauma when we go through difficult experiences. The impact on us is similar, and the process we use to heal from it is similar as well. So, as I look back, what I thought I knew and truly understood about trauma was elementary prior to my work as the director of the Residential Treatment Center. I created a foundational treatment plan for the therapists at the treatment center. And what I oversaw included much of what is shared in the book I Cubed and used in the course of trauma informed care for our new employee orientation at the hospital. So, as per my usual approach, I always like to ask questions about the common knowledge understanding of certain truths. So, if trauma happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, why would it still impact us today? It is understandable if it does, but why specifically does it impact us today? If it only happened at a time, nothing like that has ever happened since. Also, what is it about the trauma experience that completely shocks, paralyzes, and debilitates us? So, to begin, it is a result of what we call the external locus of control. This is different than the no control column that I described when it comes to anxiety. When it relates to trauma, it means that something outside of me, the external location, locus of control, is much more powerful than me and came in completely unexpected and just came in and rocked my world. The initial shock comes from the concept that I'm going about my merry way and something outside of me just abruptly altered my life and I had no control over it. A powerful example of this relates to our global experience with COVID. Even if I didn't lose someone close to me, something started on the other side of the globe, way over there, and eventually made its way around the world and just shut down everyone's quality of life. We had no control over it. We're powerless to stop it and had no choice but to accept it. That's the very essence of trauma. The first thing the person does to start processing it, of course, is asking the question, why? Asking why is ubiquitous for every human being who experienced any kind of unfulfilled expectation, but it's maximizing intensity after a traumatic experience. Again, stepping back, why would people ask the question in the first place? Who are they talking to? When I would ask the class of new employee orientation what they thought the answer was, some would say that they're talking to God or the universe. But why would they do that psychologically? Ask the question, why? Because I believe they're appealing to something that is greater than the power than the event that caused the trauma to begin with. What answer are they looking for? It's meaning and purpose behind why it happened. They want to know the possible rationale there could be for this to occur. So there are two kinds of why questions. The first why question is the what I call the pre-event why. Why did this happen? What led to this happening? Or how did this happen? We want to know the order of events and the reasons behind the decisions made and so on that led to the trauma itself. Ultimately, however, the why question has to do with meaning and purpose. I've heard many people say at some point, I don't know why that happened, but over time, I now understand why it happened. But notice that does not answer the original question, which indicates a desire to know the pre-event rationale for the event to happen in the first place. So while we process the answer to that question, there comes a point when we face a fork in the road. I have noticed that every person who has healed from trauma makes a choice to either stay on the column of external location of control or move to the column of internal location of control or locus of control by saying, I need to heal from this. I need to respond to this. They quit asking the question why and knowing they will never receive a satisfying answer to the pre-event why and simply state, look, it happened. I now have to figure out how to heal, how to respond to this. Sadly, though, There are far too many people who stay in the column of giving power to the external locus of control, and they get stuck in their new identity of what? What I lost now defines me. The longer they stay there, the transition from wounded to bitter to entitled. And now what they lost becomes a filter through which they view everything, not just the trauma itself, but view the entire world. These are the people we described as continually lamenting, the world is out to get me, right? They have that aura about them. Eventually, they become entitled because they have a right to justice and they are going to get it one way or another. This is when we describe certain people by saying of them, they believe the world owes them something. Somehow, many personal conversations land back to the story of their hurt, and they talk about it in detail, but want to portray that they have overcome it, but they just bullet point their healing and experience by saying some form of, I'm fine, I'm over it, when clearly they aren't. When clients want to avoid dating people with extreme sensitivity, hyper responses, and constant accusations, I advise them to ask about bad past relationships and how they healed from that. If the person details the trauma and just simply and just bullet points their healing steps, they're not healed. To those who are, I ask the same question I've asked myself throughout the years. Has there ever been anyone who has gone through worse than what I have and yet came through it successfully and healed? Of course. The best example of that is Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist who lost his entire family in the Nazi concentration camps, survived, and wrote about his experience in the famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. His entire response to his trauma was centered in the journey of free will, the decision to make meaning from his experiences. Obviously, no one can hold a candle to that level of trauma he experienced, but he chose to answer the question why for himself. Thankfully, many have followed in his footsteps and chosen to transition over to the column of internal locus of control and decide to heal. I summarize this process in me as in me, through me, and for me. Everyone who heals makes similar statements. I already stated one. I don't know why it happened, but now I know why it happened. So what do they mean? They're making a concluding summary of in me, through me, and for me. In me, they say some form of, I am stronger now than I've ever been. I would not wish that upon anybody, but I'm stronger now than I've ever been. Everybody who heals says some form of that. You ever notice that? There's a stark contrast between those who have and those who have not healed from trauma. Those who have healed are the ones who openly share their story as a story of power, healing, growth, and deep richness. It's the couple who stands in front of the church and talks openly about the affair one of them had, about the porn or alcohol addiction. What do they say? Some form of, as a couple, we are stronger now than we've ever been. Of course, we would not wish that what we went through on anyone, but God used it to help us become stronger than we've ever been. It's the woman who's been sexually assaulted, the child who has been sex trafficked, the alcoholic or drug addict, the spouse who has cancer. It's me and it's you. Once we have healed and start to tell our story, we start experiencing that healing happening through me. So 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 states, Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our tribulation or trials, so that purpose, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble. How? With the comfort we ourselves received from God. While God did not cause the trauma, he absolutely helps us heal from it. His goal is that through our healing, we're able to comfort others and help them heal. When we share our stories, people reach out to us and ask us to connect because they want the same thing. It's an incredibly powerful process. Finally, there is forming. This means that our healing ends up blessing us because we have become stronger and more resilient. What do we know about people who have gone through absolute hell yet came out on top of it and became better and stronger? We say, man, I want that person on my team because they get it. I call this the it factor. And have you ever said of someone, they don't get it, or man, they totally get it? What is it? Those who don't get it, we are not saying it as some level of knowledge about something, but something else. We say they are clueless, that they don't get it. that they need to, read the room, or they only see everything through their eyes. But people who truly get it, I think, are the ones who have gone through hell in some way and are stronger because of it. They're stronger and they are tough minded, but they're also humble. Why? Because they understand something about themselves. They would probably say the only way I was able to become this strong was through the pain I experienced. And I would never wish that upon anybody. So when somebody is around them who doesn't get it, they don't ridicule that person. Yes, they believe that person is clueless, but they don't demean that person because they realize what it took for them to build this resilience. They become very emotionally intelligent through the process of healing, and they obtain a certain command over life because the annoying things of life don't bother them as much. They're able to keep their cool and respond more objectively to stressors. So, in me, through me, and for me is the process of response in the column of internal locus of control. So, how does this process happen? There are many different theories and approaches to the healing process. But to illustrate, I'll use a four-column process, which is in the form of, kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. I learned this when I was getting my master's degree years ago. So in addition to this approach, I've also been trained in eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing therapy, which is, EMDR. You might have heard of that, which helps some people heal from childhood trauma. I won't go into this therapy here, but other than to say that it was, childhood experiences. They go through events that neither have the child does not have the cognitive nor emotional resources for. So the trauma becomes an impasse. It gets stuck, which simply means that the lie they believed about themselves at that moment of the trauma gets stuck. Often lies many times are centered in some form of their blame for the event. That's the lie that they believe. Certain therapies like EMDR are needed to dislodge the harmful self-interpretations a child created to cope with that trauma. I've used EMDR and other therapy techniques with my clients, and it's proven to be very, very effective. I'll give the diagram of the four-column process, here so you can see it. Now you can follow along as I walk through it. So the first step in the process is to have the client open a document on their computer and create four columns. In column one, they just write out the story, just the sequence of events, like a newspaper article, right? This happened, and this happened, and this happened. Like a sentence dump technique, something happens psychologically once it's on paper, when they see it. It may be cathartic, or it may actually increase the intensity of the story. Considering the potential impact of writing it out, it may take a while to complete it. So column two encompasses the emotions that were experienced from the story in column one. So when you write the story and the emotions you experienced, it is simply descriptive in nature, meaning it's the story of what happened and what you felt at the time it happened. The emotions also become prescriptive, describing what's coming to ahead, because it is what we carry and experience from that point forward. And as time passes, we move on with our lives. But when something in our environment reminds us of that trauma, we go through columns one and two again, process it again, and then we don't want to think about it anymore. But again, when we drive down the road, see a billboard, see a person that reminds us of that event, we go through columns one and two again, and then the cycle repeats. The problem is it becomes repetitive pain. But worse than that, it increases the frequency of the memories, because when we experience it again, it creates a new time, date, place, stamp, and so on. And every time you experience the same stimuli, it comes back again. So column three is where all the healing work happens. The more work we do in column three, the more our brains automatically link columns one, two, and three, which then automatically leads to column four. Columns two and four are just automatic results of columns one and three. All right, so now column three, the healing process. The first question to ask is whether the person who experiences the trauma has gone through the grieving process. Some have avoided the hurt and locked it away, and the first thing they need to do is to grieve and to hurt. If they have, then they must enter the gateway to all healing, forgiveness, stage one. Forgiveness stage one is simply asking yourself if you have forgiven them. Forgiving someone is sometimes confused with restoring trust or restoring the relationship with that person, but it is absolutely not. Forgiveness is separate. It is simply releasing the pursuit to, the authority to judge, punish, condemn, seek revenge, or bring justice. However, forgiveness is not forgetting, not waiting for an apology, not ceasing to feel pain, not a one-time event. Forgiveness is not automatically trusting, not reconciliation. It's not even losing. Because sometimes when we forgive someone, we feel like we're losing. It releases the constant vision in our minds of that we're not going to be the ones to execute justice on them. And this is not just a religious process. I've seen countless secular television shows and movies where characters motivate one another to forgive. And if they don't, they'll be trapped in their pain, be lost to bitterness. It's kind of a ubiquitous human experience. Even at the end of some revenge movies, when the main character is finally face to face with their perpetrator, with the perpetrator's life in their hands, someone's often calling out on the side, yelling, "Don't do it, Bob. It won't make you feel any better." Then the movie ends either with the main character choosing to spare their life or not. But it becomes obvious either way that the act of revenge does not ultimately make them feel any better. That person receiving justice does not make them feel better. So forgiveness stage 1 is the gateway to all healing. Without it, the person cannot heal. This is where I answer the question as to why I believe trauma impacts us so many years later. When I worked with the girls at the RTC, I would tell them they needed to heal, right? But I would quickly say, following up that, but to heal, you don't need to process him anymore. Logically, they believed in having to process to heal. They would need to process the traumatic event over and over and somehow get to the point where they somehow come to peace with that horrific story. This is absolutely not true. The story is that it's just the story. I explained to them that when we experience trauma, there are two things we walk away with that we carry with us that continue to impact us. The first is lies about ourselves. And more important, the impact of what we lost. Even through that process, we were powerless during the event of the trauma. We often tell ourselves the lie that it was somehow our fault or deserved it. That would be the lie. When we make any mistakes or fail, it hits our value and worth, and it's magnified because it reinforces the reasons why we experienced the trauma in the first place. If this wasn't bad enough, we lose something in the trauma. What did we lose through those experiences? When I worked with the girls at the RTC, I would ask them the same question. And it was amazing to me as I look back how quickly they came up with an answer. They would state that they lost their confidence, security, safety, trust, purity, significance, or the feeling that they were enough. When one of those elements is lost, it creates a vacuum in us. So when we experience situations from that point on where that element is needed, we don't have it to draw from and we suffer for it. We enter into situations where we need to draw from our confidence, security, safety, et cetera. But because we lost one of those items in the trauma, the emotional impact of that situation is inflated. This experience causes negative emotion inflation be described throughout this entire book. I call it the carryover effect. When our mental models are in a situation that reminds them of the trauma, our mental model assumes the threat's the same and kind of like a backhoe scoops up the emotional energy from that trauma and dumps it on the present circumstance. This is why I believe trauma is felt so many years later. And if it's not healed, it will impact us for the rest of our lives. However, this is then the exact process by which we are healed through reclaiming what we lost. When we reclaim what we lost, it's like the process of healing a broken bone. After a bone heals, it reinforces itself around the break, becoming stronger than it was before. This is why we say we're so much stronger after trauma through that we would not wish it on anyone. I'll walk through the technique of how to reclaim what we lost at the end of the video. The final step is forgiveness stage 2. This is the hardest step, but is necessary to enter into column 4, the piece. When I came to this part of training and walked through it, there were always attendees that I could see were struggling greatly with what to do. And the first stage of forgiveness is releasing the pursuit of justice. The second stage is wrestling with what happens if justice is never served. What happens when I talk about the healing process? The only way to be completely free or from the desire or need for justice, if we can't, then this is the key. Our healing becomes contingent upon that person receiving justice. And this is important. If we don't release even the desire for the person to receive justice, then our healing is connected to and contingent upon that person receiving justice. If we can't get through that process with no control calm the environment, as Christians, this process of forgiveness is enmeshed with the core of our faith. The Lord is very clear that if we do not forgive, we will not be forgiven. Matthew 6:15. He also says that whatever measure we use to judge others will be used to measure us. Matthew 7:2. So what is justice? It is an equal evaluation, equal scales of measurement. If we can't release the desire for them to receive justice, then by definition, we are saying we want justice to be executed on us as well. But then some will say, well, that's fine because I would never do what they did to me. Absolutely fair and true. However, we now need to discuss the doctrine of depravity. First, I have noticed that we are all most biased against sins and weaknesses we don't personally struggle with. The reverse is also true, meaning that there are those who are biased against the sins and weaknesses that we struggle with, but they don't. The truth of the doctrine of depravity is that we are all equally depraved in our hearts prior to salvation. This means we all have the propensity to sin to the same degree, just in our own lane of sin and weakness. The point centers on the propensity, not the actual realized failure. And the fact is, when it comes to justice, regardless of the quantity or severity of sins, this is why I believe Christianity to be true, because no one would have imagined the concept that God himself didn't release the desire for justice. He actually volunteered to take the justice of those who traumatized him upon himself. That is love. And honestly, no human being would ever think to create a story like that in their own minds. Because once that process has happened of releasing it, then we get to the final step of releasing our desire for justice and freeing ourselves from our healing being contingent upon that person receiving justice, and finally having peace. Through the process of reclaiming what we lost. In this process, I asked clients what they felt they lost. I would ask them, how do they know they lost it? So I have a worksheet here I want to walk through. How do they know that they've lost it? We have to dive down to it. Even though they might know I've lost confidence, security, safety, or peace, I want to go deeper to help them know how to reclaim it. So I ask, how do you know you've lost it? And I'd ask them what it would also look like if they had it back. They understandably have no idea what the answer to either one of those questions. And that is where I help them to define it. So in the sample worksheet here, I help clients reclaim what they lost. If they don't know exactly what it is they lost or felt like they lost, we go through the definition of each one, because I call myself a word Nazi because the definition is so specific to what they actually lost. We have to find the right word in order to be able to go through the healing process. So which word best describes what they lost? Next, I help them put words to what it feels like when they enter into situations that expose that loss and what it feels like to them. For example, they should have felt secure or confident in that particular situation, but because there's a vacuum, there's a loss, they can't tap into that. That situation creates the feeling of loss all over again, even though the situation may be completely different. Once someone loses one of those words in a traumatic experience, they have lost it in all situations that follow that resemble certain elements of the original traumatic experience. The goal of having them think through all these examples is to build a self-awareness to help prepare them for future situations. Next, I then help them create a precise descriptive picture of what they would be like if they have reclaimed that word: security, safety, trust, etc. The next piece is to create an acronym of the word and words that would be synonymous or adjacent to the word they're reclaiming, with a short sentence of description that they can lean on and remind themselves of in upcoming situations. And then next, I ask the client to be aware of daily situations that test, let's say, their safety. After that, I have them walk through the situation, sit down and reflect through the entire situation. Again, like a video, moment by moment, imagine themselves applying both the description and the words in the acronym to that situation. At every moment in that video, they envision themselves having the keyword like security, safety, and trust. In that instance, both what they would think and how they would feel. And through this meditation, they are retraining their mental models and enmeshing those very, very beautiful words they are reclaiming into their hearts and souls. It is a process, to be sure, but this is the path of healing. I agree that this entire concept of it's the gift of trauma is misleading, but it should be the gift that trauma produces. That might be better. So in this sheet is how to kind of reclaim from the process of reclaiming safety. And you can reach out to me on my website, becomingmore.com, and I can certainly share with you other sheets like that I've already have worked up on safety, on trust, on purity, and the like. And I'd be more than happy to send them to you. Thank you, and God bless.